Hello, this is Taylor Ellwood with Magical Experiments podcast. You can barely see me, but really I am here. And with me is Irisanya. And Irisanya, please introduce yourself. We can certainly see her.
Yes, I actually played with my lighting ahead of time. Hi, I'm Irisanya Moon. My pronouns are she and they, and I am coming to you from the land of the Wapo and the Great Rancheria peoples. That is Santa Rosa, California, USA. And introducing myself is always fun because there's a lot to say, and yet I don't know always where to land. So here's what I will say, is that I am a witch, I am an author, I am a priestess, and that is primarily in the Reclaiming Witchcraft tradition, which is Starhawk, spiral dance, if you've heard of that. I also am a facilitator. I'm kind of hedging away from teacher these days. So facilitator of various workshops and classes. I've taught in the US, I've taught in Canada, I've taught in the UK and Australia, and I'm very lucky to do that. I have written several books, and I have so that's always exciting. And I'm also really getting into this whole business about magic of the heart. And I think it's something with the pandemic or my life right now, who the heck knows? And so that's sort of emerging too.
Oh, excellent. That's quite an introduction. Tell me, where can we find you on the web?
I am all over the place. Thankfully, Irisanya is a very, not often used name. So looking me up is very simple. But my website is irisanyamoon.com. And that is IRISANYAMOON. I am on Facebook, I am on Instagram, I am on Twitter, I am playing on TikTok, which has been a lot of fun.
So. Yeah, I've been playing a little bit with TikTok as well. Trying to figure it out. So it's always interesting. Tell me, what are the books that you've written? You mentioned you're an author, so I was just curious. And we're going to have links to those books in the show notes as well, of course.
Thank you. Yeah. So my first book, I wrote a whole bunch of books within the span of a year, and they all came out last year.
Oh, okay. Congratulations.
Thank you. And one came out this year. Pandemic time's been a little strange for remembering time. So I may actually get one of these wrong and hopefully not. My first book that came out, these is with Moon Books, which is with John Hunt Publishing, which is now being bought by Watkins, something like that. My first book is a Pagan Portals book, and it's on reclaiming witchcraft. And so decided to write about my tradition and sort of update a few things and give folks a little bit more insight into the things that you don't really learn about reclaiming until you're kind of in it. So I thought that would be helpful. And I'm hoping that it's going to be helpful for folks who are just joining reclaiming and kind of want to know a little bit more. And also Spiral Dance was written back in, oh crud, I'm supposed to know that. So it was written back a while ago.
A long time ago. Whatever. Let's go with that.
So sorry, Starhawk. It's been 40 years. And so a lot of things that were in there are, accurate, but I wanted to bring folks up to speed with the structure. A lot of people think reclaiming is a little loose, and we actually have a lot of structures in place. So that was my first book, and that was, I think, June-ish of 2020. And then I wrote a book on Aphrodite, who is my one of my beloveds. And I wanted to write this book to sort of talk about how she's been misconstrued. I know that I really never wanted to work with her because of those preconceptions. And so I wanted to write a book in case anyone else was feeling that too. And I really consider her a goddess for me of initiation, because it's one of those things where she has this reputation of being kind of what I considered light, fluffy, all love and all of that stuff. But when I started working with her, I realized that she was teaching me about self-love. And if you've ever tried to love yourself, that's an incredibly initiatory experience and a lifelong work, I think.
Oh, yeah. We're going to be talking about that more, but sure. Yeah, love, I think love is anything but light and fluffy. Love is complicated, and it can be a lot of work at times, and it's certainly not something entered into like easily. I mean, people think that love solves all things, but I think that what they're really thinking of is being in love. And that initial moment of in loveness is great, but it's also short-lived more often than not.
Well, I think love reveals,
Right.
right? More than it, it reveals and offers a chance to grow and a chance to really see yourself. And that's hard work.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I could talk about Aphrodite all day and into the next, but the next thing that I wrote was part of a series that Moon Books was doing, and they asked me if I would write about health and wellness, but sort of taking it from, it's called Practically Pagan, so it was a little bit witch light, an alternative guide to health and wellness. Well-being, excuse me, I have it sitting right next to me, but I apparently can't read. And so basically it talks about, like, it brings folks through really my experience of cultivating that self-care and that self-love and that everyday opportunity to support yourself and to build resilience and to honor yourself as you are. This isn't a book about here's what you eat, here's how much you sleep, all that stuff. It's about how can you learn to trust yourself in order to know what's right for you. So that was well-timed. I wrote it before the pandemic, and then things happened. So I'm still learning more for myself about that. And then my most recent book came out this year in June, 2021, and it is Iris. And that is where my name comes from.
Okay.
So, and goddess of the rainbow, messenger of the gods. There's nothing written about her. There's these little scraps that I had to really look for, that people really have to look for. And I decided and asked and proposed, can I write a book on this? And so I wrote about her, my experiences with her, and a way to work with the colors of the rainbow to continuously engage in, I hold her as a goddess of service, and because she's sort of like the handmaiden folks. And so how can I be in the best service to myself and to others?
Excellent. That sounds really fascinating. So let's talk about heart magic. What is heart magic?
Well, it's in its infancy. It's actually something that I keep saying to myself, and it keeps growing and hopefully enhancing. In 2016, I was really lucky to get asked to teach at a camp, a witch camp, which is a reclaiming thing, a witch camp in Australia called Earth Song. And we were working with the story of Demeter and Persephone. And I know this beautiful witch who, dear friend of mine, his name is Jera, and he and I were sitting around and we were on the team together. So we're the folks in charge of, creating rituals and teaching classes all day and things like that. And he said something kind of offhandedly about like, oh, the love spell of life. And it just really struck me. And so I, within the course of that day, turned it into a song called Life is a Love Spell. And that was the beginning of this whole heart magic work. This idea that life is a continuous dance of moving in and out of love. Moving in and out of love, of self, of nature, of other beings, of other deities, of just this idea of like the same way that blood flows in and out of the heart. Like it's a dance. It is a giving, receiving, moving back and forth.
That's really profound.
Yeah, and the song basically said something to the effect of, well, it is this because it's super simple. Life is a love spell. We belong to dark. We belong to light. We belong to the ecstatic dance of life. And that's really the whole song. I don't know if I'm up for singing in this moment, but
that's okay. It's a beautiful, it sounds like a beautiful song. I just think it's really profound because, I think when people think about love, certainly my own experience of love is kind of like, you know, you're either in it or you're out of it. I don't think people necessarily look at it as, well, you're weaving in and out. You know, there are going to be moments where you're in love. There are moments when you're out of love. There are moments everywhere in between. And of course, I mean, love usually typically is examined in a romantic sense as well, not even through all the other veins that are available and I think are just as important as
Mhm.
romantic love.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's so, I think you live in a culture that just, worships the idea of romantic love and that that's the goal of everything. But what about love of friends? What about love of work? What about love of my cats? Love of so many other things. It's such a multifaceted experience, or it can be.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think that maybe as a culture, we're unbalanced because we're so focused on the romantic love and not on anything else.
Yeah, I mean, living in a female body, it feels like that is my goal in life, is to fall in love. And that is what I'm supposed to do. And I mean, yeah, that'd be great. I'm going through a really tremendous breakup right now. And so like it is, yeah, I mean, to even feel like in this process that I'm supposed to be like getting over it and going on to something else. And it's so interesting to me. And so this is why this magic has come up for me now, I think. It's been building.
It sounds really interesting. I mean, I went through an experience like that earlier this year. I mean, I got divorced. And then, I think that just experiencing that and recognizing, like I had to make space for that it wasn't something that could just be gotten through quickly. And that even now, I'm still very much working through it as a process, that it's not something that just happens like that. And you can't really apply anything else over it to fix it. It just ends up becoming a Band-Aid that ends up actually just masking the wound instead of actually dealing with the wound.
Yeah. And I think that there is this feeling that it's like you said, like it's sort of on and off, that it's supposed to be like, oh, you're either in or you're out. And it's like the heart keeps moving, right? And we keep moving and we keep moving back and forth from it. And I know that for myself and the experience that I'm having right now, there are 2 hours of the day where I feel totally excited about where my life is going. And then there are other hours of the day where I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. I don't know if this is the right thing to feel. It is this constant dance. It is just ongoing and almost that, now I can't remember the name of what this is. Like
The
sort of
Lemon's
the
Gate.
infinity symbol, Lemnisket, thank you.
Yeah.
And like, that's what it feels like to me. And so when I think of like how to like bring my magicalness or like my heart into this and fuse them both, I think about my relationships to something that is bigger than me and not in a hierarchical way. And I talk about like my relationships to deity. I don't consider that hierarchical.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. And I think about my relationship to myself. And I also think about the relationship to my community and to my beloveds and to the folks who are there and who support and witness. So those are sort of the three things that I think are magic of the heart. Like those are the things. Like, what am I devoted to? How am I devoted to myself? How am I surrounding myself with people who are supportive or beings, or I count my
whatever cats. Yeah, pets
exactly.
are definitely a part of that. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Those are great questions to be asking. You mentioned earlier that, you're talking about Aphrodite and how Aphrodite has been misconstrued. And we talked a little bit about that, I think, already, but could you go into that a little bit more? Because I think that seems probably pretty relevant to what we're talking about here with the heart magic.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a funny one. So I think that, when you look at all the art of her, it's sort of this, so beautiful and so like that cultural understanding of what female beauty is, like this very slim, this very bosomed being. And there's something about that is what has been put on her and how she's been interpreted.
Mhm.
And so my book about Aphrodite talks about her more as, I think, more as movement, not about definition. She's more about the energy, and the energy of love as something that heals, but doesn't always feel good.
Mhm. Mm.
And like for me, she showed up and sort of was one of those deities who said, we're working together. And I'd never, I mean, I'd sort of had that experience, but it was someone who I was really not interested in. So I even think about that in terms of relationship. Like I really was not, this is not the time for you. It will never be the time for you. And then kind of a persistent being. Like she's not just the one that like arrives on the sea foam and arrives, you know, sort of because of all of these stories that I think are just told by the ones who translated them. You know, she has the story that, you know, she's born on sea foam because of cutting off the genitals of, you know, another god. And really, that is the strangest thing I'd ever heard. And I actually question if she was born fully of herself, but a story had to be told that it was at the expense of someone else.
Mhm.
So those are some of the things that I touch on in there, the stories that are told of her,
Mhm.
which I think do more harm.
Mm.
And the images of her, which I think sometimes do harm, which is one of the reasons why I really want, like if anybody were to pull anything out of that book, I would hope that it is your relationship to her is your relationship to her. I can't actually tell you. Like I am not, I know what mine looks like, but yours is different.
Right. Well, as it should be with any spirit. I mean, there's really no prescriptive way that you can. I mean, there are plenty of people who will tell you prescriptive ways you can have relationships with spirits. Let's just be clear here. But
Yes,
I don't think that those are necessarily helpful or healthy. I mean, because they're really just telling you their relationships and saying why you should have those relationships yourself. But how can that really happen?
Right. And I think that takes away agency, right? I mean, I think that that's really the trick for me is like, for me, magic is about like figuring out and holding and supporting my understanding of my power. And when we take away agency by basically saying there is only one way to do this, that's problematic to me.
Yeah, I think that's very problematic because agency is something that really empowers us. And so if we don't have agency, how can we really form a genuine relationship with whatever it is that we're working with or whoever we're working with or in whatever other way we're showing up?
And that also requires knowing who we are. And that is it's a dicey proposition. You know, I think for me at least.
Oh no, I agree with you. I'm fully with you on that one. I mean, it's a very dicey proposition. I mean, I struggle with that all the time. I'm like, do I really even know myself?
And does that, and do we need to land on an answer? I don't know. I think
Do I even
that,
like the answer I land on?
at least not today. Who knows?
Not today, right? There really are. It's interesting. You know, I keep a journal of my own personal thoughts and things, and you know, there are times I look at that journal, I'm like, I really don't like the person who's written this.
Yeah.
You know, I really don't like who this person is, and yet this person's me.
Yes. And how do I reconcile that? And I think that that is going back again and again and going like, what is my heart? Where's my heart now? How is it relating to things? Not like, what is it in relationship with, but the action of relating. How am I doing that? Am I doing it honestly? Am I doing it consistently? One of my teachers once said, you know, and I think this is something that a lot of teachers have said, however, it really struck me, was the whole idea of like how you relate to one thing is how you relate to everything. And that was something that hit me in that moment. like, I get that that is a pretty big way to say, watch how you're relating to other things because it might be a pattern. But when I think about, how am I relating to myself is often how I'm relating to others. Like, I'm not taking care of myself, I'm probably not taking care of my relationships. Like, how I'm relating to the needs of my friends is often can be diagnostic about things that are going on in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Well, I mean, there is something to be said for the fact that we're, I mean, in a very real sense, we're always looking at our own relationship with ourselves in context to other people.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Maybe. I don't know. I think that, like, that's the thing with all this love business, is that I think it's really hard to break away from the idea that there is an ideal way it's supposed to look.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm reading right now. I'm just going to share this. I'm reading a book called, well, you may not be able to really see it, Perfect Love, Imperfect Relationships by John Wellwood, called Healing the Wound of the Heart. And it's interesting because what he does is he explores grievance and where grievance shows up in the process of love and how it really keeps us from genuine connection. And as I'm working through this book, I'm like, wow, I really see where I've held on to grievances and how I hold on to them and how they show up and how it really causes, it really causes me to move away from being connected in love with love, and whether love to myself or love to anyone else, because it's really, instead it creates this false armor, this sense of strength that really isn't there. But because I can hold on to it and cling to it, that gives me something to basically feel better about.
Yes.
In the moment, but actually the longer I hold on to it, the worse it makes me feel.
Yeah, that's a hard one. And it's a hard thing to sort of feel into and to lean into. I think that there's something related for me, at least in that, with the idea of I have to meet people as they are versus who I think they should be, and
that's a hard one.
Yeah, it's quote on air quotes fun. And I think that in order to have, like, the connection, the magic is really showing up as I am, as you are, as this moment is. But it's not easy, and I think that for me is I wonder if that is why the metaphor of the heart works so well, because it's the thing that's always there. I mean, hopefully, until it's not. It's the thing to return to. It's the thing to come back to. And it's the thing that is of this moment.
Yeah. Really resonates for me right now. This particular interview, it's kind of interesting. As I was sharing with you earlier before, I've done a few of these today. They're going to all come out at different dates, but I mean, this one really hits home in a very real sense, because I think, it is also about, like, what am I projecting onto somebody else? For example, what am I projecting onto myself? Like, am I saying who, for example, who should I be, as opposed to who am I?
That's a real swimmy one, isn't it? I don't know about you, but that is a thing that I really need to work on, because I grew up with love being so conditional, like love being based on, if you do this, then I will show you love. So I still have
transactional models of love.
Transactional, yes. And so I still have that groove where I think that that's the way I need to act, and that's how other people need to act. And that is a real separating, a real moving away from each other, because you're kind of like telling stories in opposite edges of the room.
Well, and you're also constantly evaluating the person and saying, well, okay, are they showing up this way? Well, then they love me. If they show up this way, they don't love me. If I do this, I love them. If I don't do that, I don't love them. is there. It just creates this very artificial sense of kind of back and forth, but then there's no real genuine depth there, and I think that can be very harmful in the end. It's a very yeah, I mean, I've definitely had that kind of experience before, that transactional model of love in the past, and that's not a good feeling, because it just it seems like both sides then at that point are constantly evaluating, like, well, has this person really given me love? Instead of actually recognizing that perhaps love was there all along.
Well, and I think too, what's tricky about that, or at least what might be tricky about that, because it's just coming into my head, is the idea that it feels really heady. Like, I do think that love has, you know, some logic to it, and some, you know, conversations about consent and, you know, expectations, values, things like that. But like this whole idea of like, what is love, becomes this heady thing. And it's like, well, what about the body? Like, what about my embodied sense of this? And that's something that I'm trying to tap into more, that it's less about, I don't know, I can talk circles around this, but can I feel it? Can I feel where I am connected and where I'm not? Am I willing to listen to that feeling?
And that's really hard. I mean, love is feeling love and talking about love are two very different things.
And also, if we throw trauma into the mix, we throw stress, we throw a pandemic into the mix, I think that that makes it all a little bit trickier too.
Yeah. So with that in mind, how do we apply magic to this? How do we apply heart magic to these kinds of issues? What can we do to move us from a place of talking about, thinking about, to actually experiencing and being present with love?
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk about is the idea of building some sort of relationship to deity, energy. I know not everyone's a deist, and that's totally fine, but finding some way to build a relationship with something that you hold as divine, something that is sort of the bigger picture, if you will. So this might be, you know, getting out into nature. This could be doing more work with a deity that you work with that feels like it's the right fit. But I think that creating that relationship, I don't know if this is a first 1, 2, 3 step thing, so change up the order, but that's the first one that I think of, is starting with that and sitting in the presence of this feeling of divine and opening yourself up to the possibility that there are messages, signs, signals, whatever you want to call them, that will help you begin to understand what direction is helpful right now. I believe that there is, I mean, I believe in deities. That's a whole other topic, but I also believe in nature. I go out a lot into nature now for that right now. That feels really important, because there's something about watching the cycles of life and death over and over, and resilience, and accidents happening in nature, all of that, that really helps ground me and give me perspective. So
yeah, you know, going out and walking in nature, being in nature, is, I think, a really healing activity.
Yeah, I'm actually going to do that later on tonight, and I've already walked this morning. So
yeah, I'm going to do it too.
Yes. And so I think that that's a really good place to start if that's your thing. Again, finding nature, finding a quiet moment. I mean, cuddling with your cat, something bigger, something that is something that you hold as holy, divine, whatever you want to call it. And then I do think about the idea of self-care as magic and the ways in which we can show up for ourselves. And I don't mean all the things that self-care has become in society. That's actually in my health and well-being book. I go, let's break that down a bit. Self-care. And so that to me is as simple as taking 5 minutes for yourself. 5 minutes. It does not have to be pricey. It does not have to involve a mask or a bubble bath or any of the other things that are sort of thrust on us. But taking care of myself is also feeding myself foods that are nourishing for my body, whatever that means, possibly drinking a glass of water. That's my big problem most of the time. Very cranky if I don't drink water. But really caring for this altar and this divine being, I think is such another act of devotion,
Mm-hmm.
and another act of supporting this heart, this physical heart.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's one other thing I wanted to say about that. I think trusting that, oh, this is what I was going to say. I think it's really easy for me to say self-care. And I think that I missed in the book, and that brought out later on in a different article, I missed community care in that. And the idea that, yes, resilience of self, but also having folks is also really important. And cultivating that care, because sometimes you can't do it all for yourself.
No, that's true. You really can't. I mean, I think that's true. Today, because I've been doing these interviews, I took a little rest in between the last one I did and this one, because it's just like I need some. I'd eaten a nice meal, went for a walk, and it's like, all right, I'm just going to rest for a little bit before I get started on this next one, because I know I need to take care of myself this way.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's so important. And and not just for Instagram, opportunities and things like that. It's just so helpful. I was not very good at it for a very long time. And I now know, because I've done this enough, that literally if I don't drink enough water, I am the crankiest being. And I get mad really easily. And so just doing something simple to take care of myself, not expensive, not horribly time consuming even,
Mm-hmm.
I think is the next part of this magic, at least at this point. Because like I said, this is evolving.
I'm really fascinated with it.
It is, I think it's like all the experiences of my life, I think are just starting to come together, and I'm recognizing that I have pieces, and I'm still collecting all the pieces from the different places. So stay tuned. I am actually doing a presentation on this in 2022 at I'm just going to look it up real quick. Scroll, darn you, Between the Veils in San Jose, California. So I'm going to be presenting that. So I'm going to have even more ideas by then, I have no doubt. And then the third part of the magic, like I've said before, is this whole idea of being held in community. And I'm holding that differently from the community care aspect. I'm holding this more as not just reaching out in devotion, reaching inwards to support yourself, but also reaching outwards to pass it on. Mm-hmm. The heart keeps moving, right? So it's not just like the bringing in of the oxygen, it's taking in the way of the waste and all of that. So moving out into how to be of service to others. And that doesn't have to be a huge, thing either. You don't need to give of yourself and wring yourself out until you're nothing, says the person who used to do that. And, how can you also support out and give soft places to land for other folks, because you have also supported yourself and have something to give.
Right.
So this could be anything from spiritual stuff, not as glamorous stuff, so to speak. It could be, noticing what talents, resources, whatever you have that you can give outwards then.
There's something to be said to that too, where I think really, in order to be able to give to others, you have to give to yourself first. Mm-hmm. If you're not giving to yourself, if you're not taking care of yourself, then it's really hard to do anything else for anyone else. I was talking with a friend of mine across the pond today for a bit, and we were talking about that very thing. And she said, it's good for you. It's a good idea for you to take some time to rest. But she's like, but I hate resting. I hate it.
Me too.
I'm like, yeah, because I'm a doer. Like I'm always out there. I'm doing things. I want to do stuff. It's always like it's in me, and it's like, but how much of that is really a conditioning of our culture as well, where it's like you're only valued if you're doing something.
Yeah, I know. I'm a doer too, says the person who wrote 3 books in a year. I understand. I've done it. And how can you give forward? Like you can't, like, I think about it. This is one sort of non-magical example. A long time ago, ran a marathon.
Mhm.
And that, I think run is probably a strong term, but I did finish it. And a few weeks later, I had signed up to run a 10K, thinking, well, it's only a 10K. So I have already done 26.2 miles. This is going to be nothing. I couldn't do it. I literally could not do it because I had burned all of my resources, all of my
You hit a wall.
resources, and all of my physical resources.
Yeah, you hit a wall.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing. Like you hit a wall at a certain point, and says the person who wrote 6 books this year, and yet had written 10 books last year.
Right.
So I mean, I get with you on that. I mean, it was interesting. I said at one point, yeah, I'm like, I've only written 6 books this year. I'm working on book number 7 now, but I'm like, I only written 6 books. And one friend looked at me, he's like, that's a lot. I'm like, yeah, but I'm so used to like doing more. And it's like, but this year was so hard. I mean, I had the divorce. I didn't feel like writing for a while. There was no real joy in it. And, I had other things going on, and then relocating to a new city and exploring other things. And, even now I feel like I'm really just beginning to recognize just how important it is, even more so, to rest. It's like, well, you've done all this stuff. Like you give yourself a break.
Yeah, I think that's especially in the middle of a pandemic. I think that it was so funny because in the beginning, for me at least, I was like, well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. It's just going to be online. And it's a different energy level that I needed. I just thought, well, I'm just going to just be in a different, I don't have to drive, so maybe it'll be even easier. So I taught even more and I wrote even more. And then at one point, I think I just had a moment of, what in the heck are you doing?
Yeah,
What?
being online is exhausting.
And yet awesome. I'm going to be clear about that.
It is awesome. It is awesome. I mean, it's a fun way to interact. But I mean, I as an example, I've scaled back a lot of my interactions online on like Facebook, and done that because I've just been like, this is too much in a way. I'm not getting to other things that I want to get done because I'm too busy on here. So it's like there's a point where, like, yes, it's a great thing, but there's another point where it's like, but is it? Where do you find that balance?
Yeah, still figuring that out. I think that's an ongoing thing. Like what works now, what worked, because sometimes what worked yesterday doesn't work today. And sometimes what worked last year won't work this year. And I think that is part of this whole heart business. This is the whole, listening enough, being aware enough, being willing enough to slow down enough to hear what's going on. And I think for me, that is my biggest lesson in life so far, is that I need to slow down enough to actually hear what's up. And the pandemic has really helped me with that. If there was ever a gift of this, it was that. It was that I had to confront what happens when things slow down, when they're not in my control. And what if I could look at that as an opportunity?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a great way to look at it. I mean, we've all had to confront that in one form or another.
Some of us with some extra bonuses in there to really confront it. But yes, I mean, I've moved, I've done that too. It's these hearts are what we share as in humanity, like these beautiful muscles and these heartbeats that make up a life. And I guess for me, I just really in all of my work that I've done up to this point, at least, my biggest thing that I've always said is that we're not alone. And mostly because I'm trying to really remind myself. But I think right now, that is the message of the heart, is that you're not alone. You know, how can you reach out? How can you reach up if that's works for you in divine? How can you reach in and hold yourself in all of this, whatever this is? We've all had experiences. This pandemic is probably filled to the brim with things that we don't know about the people that we love, with things that were celebrated, that were lost, a lot of things we don't know.
You know, I think the pandemic really ended up being a catalyst of sorts. I mean, it put everything under a pressure cooker. And, you know, it's interesting because I look at who I was before the pandemic, and then I look at myself as a result of the pandemic, and I'm a very different person in a lot of ways. I'm like, wow, did I ever share this much before, like on social media? I didn't. So why did I start? Because I felt isolated. I felt alone. I felt disconnected. And that was a way to do it.
Yeah.
Did I, you know, I mean, these are just some of the things that I've been thinking about lately as I've been reevaluating things. Cause I'm like, well, you know, where am I at now? And how does being, you know, do I let myself continue to be defined by this pandemic and by the things that happened in it? Or do I find a way to move forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm really curious about what happens to society moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
I'm real curious because I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was sort of like, I think I phrased it as I'm concerned about the folks who didn't necessarily go through this, still going through this experience. To be clear, it is not over. Still going through this experience without tools, resources, support. Like, what happens after that? Whew. That is just.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, that's a hard thing.
Yeah, and that's, I think, you know, not to belabor the point, but it feels like that's why I talk about the heart a lot. I'm like, okay, so how are we going to hold these things? How are we going to heal, maybe? Or I'm less about healing these days and I'm more about integrating. Like, how do I build my life around what has happened? What has, you know, how do I do that?
Yeah. No, I feel you on that one. It's a hard question to answer. I think it's not. Yeah, I'm trying to figure that one out myself.
Right.
Well, you know, we're getting close to the end of the show here, so I'd love it if you could share one more time where people can find you online, and then also any final thoughts you want to share.
Yeah. So online, I have a website, www.irisanyamoon.com. I also have a Facebook page that's like an author page. I also have a Facebook page that is my blog through Witches Pagan called Charged by the Goddess. And I'm on Twitter, sort of. I'm on Instagram more often. TikTok is just hilarious to watch me do stuff. So I have a lot of fun with that. So I'm kind of all over the place, and probably some other places that I'm not thinking of right now. So my website is the best place. I have a newsletter that comes out once a month around the new moon. So that's always good. I already talked about my books, but I have a couple more books that are in the works. So I'm just going to give them a little shout out because they're coming. I have another book on Reclaiming Witchcraft, but talking about the history of environmental activism in the tradition. So it's not going to be the longest book in the world because it's part of a series, but I actually have collected a lot of writing folks across the tradition, so that I'm actually not the voice in this. Everyone who's actually been around longer than I have, and also folks who are newer, are contributing their voices. So that's great. And I'm writing another book on the Norns, the Weird Sisters, for folks who are familiar. And then I'm writing a book on Gaia. So,
Oh, wow. Busy work there.
yeah. And then, of course, you know, you're a writer, a whole bunch of proposals in my head. So,
Yeah. Well, I don't do the proposals part. I just self-publish, but yeah, I get it.
mhm.
I'm working on Walking with Elemental Spirits myself right now. So that's kind of my
Nice.
book project. So yeah.
Mm.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on to the show here. It was really a delight. I mean, I think we've been connected online for a long time, but this is really the first time we've actually ever talked. And I'm sorry it didn't happen sooner, but I'm glad it has happened. And I'm definitely going to check out the book on Aphrodite. I'm really curious about that, and think it would be relevant in my own work around love right now. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sure there's going to be more stuff about love coming out because if I am a writer of any sense, I am mining my life for content. So,
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Well, I'll definitely have you back on sometime again.
thank you.